Hello, welcome back. I have returned from the worst offshore project I've ever been involved with. The most disorganised, unprofessional, with no safety standards whatsoever. 6-man shared cabins, and somebody got sick with the flu really badly and spread it throughout the vessel because it came through all the air conditioning system, so everybody got sick. I'm still getting over it. Anyway, this is my Komodo double cab GS02F. It is very, very pretty. It is also very capable, and it is very broken. As a recap, I owned the old Komodo double cab, the GS02. This is the GS02F. I owned GS02, and it was fabulous. It was extremely tough. I owned it for a couple of years. I never had anything wrong with it, and I didn't treat it nicely. It was very capable, and I wanted to help Gmade and support them because I saw on various forums that they were having some issues with the earlier models, etc. For example, the bomb's gearbox from the original GS02 bomb, and they were listening to feedback and upgrading things and improving things as they went along, and gave owners free parts when the case of the bomb because the gearbox issues was a design flaw. So anyway, they seemed to be the sort of company that I would like to support. So I bought the newer GS02F. And it seemed to be everything the old one was, but more. It had the same chassis, the same axles, but it had a completely different layout. It had more front bias. It had overdrive in the front axle. It had 2-speed. It had inner fenders. It just seemed to be the same, but more. Perfect. But here's the thing. My old Komodo GS02 lasted a couple of years with no issues whatsoever. This one lasted about a couple of runs, maybe over a month and a half. It's had some sort of catastrophic failure. So what happened? Well, it was running fine. And specifically, it's sounding fine. The gearbox was smooth and quiet. There was no obvious issues of gearbox problems. You know, if a gearbox is beginning to let go, you can hear it, you can feel it. There's vibrations, there's noise. Nothing like that. But then sometimes it would just lose drive at a certain part of the drivetrain and make a horrible noise. But the problem was, where it lost drive seemed to shift around. Sometimes the front prop shaft would be turning, but the front axles wouldn't. Okay, sounds like a front axle issue. Sometimes the rear prop would be turning, and the rear axle wouldn't be turning. Okay, what happened there? That was a rear axle issue. Sometimes neither prop would be turning, and the noise would be coming from inside the gearbox. So how is that? How can it shift around? So the title of this video is Design Flaw or Defect, because, well, there's a few issues with this thing that need addressed. Anyway, what happened? Well, I rebuilt this gearbox 4 times, kept on stripping it apart, trying to find what was wrong with it, because like I said, sometimes there was no output from the output shafts. The drive wasn't getting any further from the gearbox, so that's where I looked and couldn't find anything. Every pin, every tooth, every gear, everything was in great condition. Eventually, a bit of a loss, I decided to check the axles anyway, because although sometimes the output wasn't getting out of the gearbox, sometimes it was. Sometimes it was getting along the shaft, and then I wouldn't lose, I would lose drive. So, checking here, and these joints, front and rear, were wobbling around massively. Okay then, seems a bearing has failed. You've got a bearing here, small one, and I've got a larger bearing inside, where the crown and pinion gears meet. And it's exactly what's happened. They've moved around, and so the teeth have separated a bit, not quite getting engagement, and they've actually worn away. So, okay, there was definitely a problem with the front axle. Definitely. Well, that's unusual because my old truck, the GS02, has exactly the same axles and never had an issue. Why is it having an issue now? Never mind, I had the front axle from the old truck. Took that apart to check. Bearings were still perfect on the old axle, even though it had 2 years of use plus, whereas this only had about a month and a half. So the bearings hadn't collapsed, even though they're the same bearings. However, there was one tooth chipped off on the old axle. Could have just been debris or something. I'll give that the benefit of the doubt. One tooth, no other wear. Okay, so I couldn't use the front axle gears. So therefore, bear in mind the old one doesn't have any overdrive, and the overdrive on this is from the gearbox, not the axles, so they're interchangeable. I used the rear axle gears from the old truck on the front axle of this one. That solved it. So those gears are in perfect condition. Put them in this one. What about the back? Well, I can't use the front axle from the old truck. It's got a chip in it. Can't use the rear axle from the old truck because the gears are in here. What if these are knackered too? Took it apart. Again, the bearing had fallen to pieces. It completely collapsed. Same as the front. You open up and bits of ball bearing and shields and everything come flying out. But thankfully the teeth were okay on these gears. So that was fine. Just take the bearings out of the old one. Sorted. Okay, so I now have 2 working axles. That's fine. But we then took the truck out. I was confident it was fine now. Matthew and I went rock crawling. Then I lost drive again. Same thing. Vibrations, rattling, no drive, nothing from the gearbox. But these are fine now. What is going on? This thing had multiple simultaneous problems. Okay, take the gearbox apart. Can't see a damn thing. Everything seems fine. So what was going on? Why is the old one so much tougher than the new one? The old one has the same axles, the same gears, the same bearings. It does have the same shafts, although I've changed them, but I put metal ones in the old one too. It has the same spur, the same slipper. Well, the old one doesn't have a 2-speed gearbox. Also doesn't have overdrive. The 2-speed on this truck does not operate smoothly. You have a cam. The cam goes through here. See these? Slot in together, but there's lots of movement. What happens is, when you select the gear, this pushes in here or pushes into the other one. There's another one on the corresponding side, the opposite side, corresponding one. Goes like that or like that. This will slot in. Then you've got your 2-speed or your, so you've got your single high speed or your single low speed, and you can switch between the two like that. The truck has to be moving slowly in order to engage gear, because the chances of you plugging it in straight away like that, the chance of it being absolutely lined up perfectly is nil, because the gaps on this one don't correspond exactly with the gaps on that side because they're at slightly different rotations. So if it's correct for one side, it's not going to be correct for the other side. So you've got to snick it into gear. You've got to be slightly moving. Problem is it's not smooth. It goes bang into gear. Changing down from from high to low, not so much of a problem if you're going slow enough. Changing from low to high introduces a huge amount of extra load on the entire system, on the entire drivetrain. All of a sudden it goes bang, and all of a sudden you've got so much more load. It's that not at all smooth input, I think, is the issue. So you're driving along slowly, all of a sudden, and it really thumps in. So all of a sudden you're introducing load to the slipper, the motor, the gearbox, the axles, the prop shafts. So is it just a 2-speed? Well, no. You've also got overdrive on the front axle. The front axle is under more load than the back axle. So the front axle, I don't know if it's already marginal with the overdrive. Maybe, maybe not. But that sudden slamming into higher gear with the load that's associated with it, I think that's the problem, because again, we found nothing wrong. So here's my theory. When I was losing drive from the center and the prop shafts weren't turning, there was no output from the gearbox, I think it's because it was going bang into the, introducing extra loads, and the slipper was spinning. Slipper wasn't grabbing because it's just too much load. It's got the same slipper as the old truck. The old truck doesn't have 2-speed, doesn't have an overdrive. I think it's beyond the limit of that slipper when you slam it into higher gear. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem. So that's what we found out. Matthew and I stripped the gearbox again. We think, right, okay, there's nothing else wrong here. The slipper must be the only thing left. Everything else was perfect. Everything else, even after losing drive, once the axles were fixed. So the axles are solid, they're sorted, there's nothing wrong with the axles now. Still we were losing drive. It's gotta be the slipper. Everything else is perfect. And so what we tried to do is tighten the slipper up as much as it'll go. Right, well, screw slip, we'll just take the risk. Everything else is strong, it's a strong gearbox, strong drivetrain. We'll tighten this up and be very careful with the 2-speed. This is where the main defect / design flaw comes in, because where are you? There we are. The output shaft in the gearbox. I believe it goes to the not sure if it's the back axle or the front axle, or maybe both. But anyway, the output shaft is not the thinnest and weakest shaft in this drivetrain. The one that goes from where the slipper is down and then along the length of it under the battery is the longest and thinnest shaft in that gearbox. It's fine. The output shaft in the middle, sheared perfectly. See that? Very smooth shear. While we were tightening up, we were holding the outputs, tightening up the slipper as much as it would go. We didn't even go that tight yet. We were just cranking it, and this went snapped. It wasn't fractured. It hadn't had previous damage, you know, if there was hairline fractures in it or anything, nothing like that. It just sheared cleanly in that one instance. Where did it shear? Well, the thinnest part, the part the E-clip goes on. But as I said, I mean, look at the thickness of that. If that's good steel, there's no way that's shearing. No way. It's obviously not that good steel. So, was that a defect? Did I just have a faulty one that wasn't, you know, made very well, had some sort of flaw in the metal, and that's why it's sheared? Or is the entire thing just on its limit? That's the point where the most of the load is, you know, set upon. So when you're shifting, when you're driving around, when you've got it on overdrive at the front and you've got a high gear here, is all the strain on that point or on that shaft? Maybe. So what caused all this and what's the solution? Well, I don't really know. Yes, I've got heavier wheels, metal beadlocks with bigger tyres. I have stainless steel links. I have SSD knuckle weights. I have metal prop shafts. All adds to the weight, which all increases the load on the drivetrain. But those are the exact same tyres, the exact same wheels, the exact same knuckle weights, different but similar metal drive shafts, and different but similar steel links as I had on my old Komodo, which had the same powertrain, which has the same motor, same speed controller, that I lifted off the old one and put it in this one. This is running the same spec as the old one. The old one survived it, this one didn't. Why? It's got to be the 2-speed. It's got to be. I mean, maybe the overdrive, but I firmly believe if the old one had overdrive and it just, okay, there's a little bit more load on the front axle, I don't believe any of that problem would have happened. I don't think you'd have the collapsed bearings, therefore I don't think you'd have the worn out gears. I just don't think any of it would have happened. It's that shunting motion. And then on top of that, not only does it, it's a sudden bang, like when you land, I've got something in my face there, when you land something on throttle off a jump and you suddenly get that bang, that horrible load through the drivetrain. That's the same sort of thing that's happening. But then you've got the higher load as a result of having a, you know, you're in the higher gear, you're in the second gear, the higher speed gear. So this product hasn't been on the market very long, this GS02F chassis. I firmly believe that you're going to start seeing more horror stories of the same sort of thing happening, because I did not treat this roughly at all, unless, of course, as I said, I have a defect. But even still, that defect snapped, just like that, snapped. It was perfect until it wasn't, but I'd already had these issues. So my solution in the meantime is I'm going to sack off the 2-speed. I'm going to get rid of this servo, I'm going to lock it into the lower speed, the lower gear, and just keep it there. I'll still have the overdrive, but with the exception of that overdrive, the rest of the drivetrain will be essentially identical to the old Komodo, the GS02. I'll have the same slipper, slightly different gearbox, but the gearbox is strong. Nothing happened to it apart from when that thing suddenly let go, but the problems were already there. That's the solution for me in the meantime. Gmade may need to address this in the future if more people have this happening. I believe that will happen. I believe what it comes down to is slightly poor design on the 2-speed shifting, or very poor design, and possibly slightly suspect quality of the metal in the gearbox. We'll see. So yeah, in the meantime, single speed. I'm annoyed about it. I mean, I don't care for the 2-speed at all. I mean, I think it's just a gimmick. But the fact that I've got a product that isn't 100% working annoys me. You know, it should work. Came with it. It should work, but it doesn't. Would it have worked with the standard plastic wheels and lightweight links and without the knuckle weights? Maybe, maybe not. That's not the point. You know, everybody puts metal beadlocks on all their crawlers. I know if I'd bought an Axial SX-10-3, which has basically the same spec but also portal axles, that would have been fine. So it's not acceptable. In the meantime, all I can say is watch this space. I'll report on whether it works perfectly without the 2-speed shifting. Also, watch the space just in general on the forums, etc. If you see anybody else talking about this problem, maybe Gmade will address it. In the meantime, what I will say is, if you're considering a Komodo double cab, consider the old one. The old one isn't quite on paper as competitive as this one. I haven't noticed any real difference, to be honest with you. The old one was really good. This one's really good as well. I guess on a head-to-head on the most difficult courses, this one would be slightly better. I've never come across any situation where this made it and the other one wouldn't have. So consider the old one. It is cheaper. It's obviously more robust, simpler, and it has the same stunning looking body shell. It doesn't have the fenders though. Yeah. I'm not going to say avoid the GS02F chassis. What I will say is be cautious. Bear in mind there is an issue, and I think it's the 2-speed. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll report back. See you later.